I came to return my ex's things, not to get locked inside her apartment by her roommate. The box was heavier than it should been. Old sweaters, a framed photo, a mug that said forever. I told myself this was closure, clean, quiet. Adult. When the door opened, it wasn't my ex standing there. It was her roommate. She looked at the box, then at me, and instead of calling my ex, she grabbed my wrist, pulled me inside, and locked the door behind us. The click echoed. She leaned against it, smiling slowly. Leaving already? I stood there, holding that ridiculous box, completely caught off guard. I just came to drop this off, I said, lifting the box slightly as if she couldn't already see it. Is she home? She crossed her arms, tilted her head, and studied me the way someone studies a painting they're not quite sure they like yet. No, she said simply. Okay. I shifted my weight toward the door. Then maybe I'll just leave it. You were going to set it on the doorstep, weren't you? She interrupted, a quiet amusement threading through her voice. Ring the bell, run back to your car before anyone answered. Classic disappearing act. I opened my mouth to argue. Then I closed it, because she was right and we both knew it. She laughed softly, not mockingly, just easy, natural. Like she found something genuinely funny about me standing there, holding a box full of someone else's memories, with absolutely no idea what to do with my hands. I'm Maya, she said, as if we hadn't been introduced before. We had, twice, but I appreciated the reset. I know who you are, I said. Good. She pushed off the door and walked toward the kitchen. Then you know I make excellent coffee and terrible decisions. Sit down. I didn't sit down. But I did set the box on the floor. That was probably my first mistake. The thing about Maya was that I had always registered her the way you register background music. Present, pleasant, not something you stop and actually listen to. When I was with my ex, Maya was just there. A voice from the other room, a laugh through a closed door. Someone who borrowed the last of the oat milk and left a sticky note apology on the fridge that said, "Deeply sorry. Replacing tomorrow? Emotionally, I owe you more." I had smiled at that note once, but I never thought about the person who wrote it. Now she was standing in the kitchen, spooning coffee grounds into a press, humming something low and unbothered, and I was watching her like I was seeing a color I didn't have a name for yet. You're staring, she said without turning around. I'm just standing here. You're staring while standing. She turned then, leaning against the counter with her arms folded loosely. It's okay. People stare. When they're confused. Are you confused? I'm wondering why you locked the door, I said. She smiled again. That same slow, deliberate smile she'd used when she pulled me inside. Like she had all the time in the world and found my impatience quietly entertaining. Because you needed 5 minutes to breathe before you drove home feeling sorry for yourself, she said, and I saved you from the doorstep situation. You're welcome. I wasn't going to feel sorry for myself. You had the box, she said, nodding toward it. And the look, what look? She paused, studying me for just a moment too long. Then she said, very gently, the one that says you're trying very hard to look like you're okay. The kitchen went quiet. The coffee press sat untouched between us. And I felt something shift in the room. Or maybe in me. Like a door opening inside a house. I thought had been empty for a long time. I didn't have a response to that. I never do when someone says something true. She turned back to the coffee without making it awkward, and I exhaled slowly, pulling out a bar stool and sitting down. 5 minutes, I said. She glanced over her shoulder, something warm and quietly satisfied crossing her face. 5 minutes, she agreed. But even then, standing in a kitchen that wasn't mine, across from a woman I had somehow never actually seen before, I had the strange, unsettling feeling that 5 minutes was going to be the beginning of something I wasn't remotely prepared for. The coffee was good. Better than I expected. Better than most things had felt in weeks. I wrapped both hands around the mug and stared into it for a moment, the way you do when you're collecting yourself, before saying something you haven't said out loud yet. She didn't fight for it, I said finally. The relationship. I kept waiting for her to, I don't know, push back, ask me to stay, something. I shook my head. She just nodded and said, "Okay, that makes sense." Maya was quiet. She didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurances or hollow comfort. She just sat across from me at the small kitchen table, both hands wrapped around her own mug, listening in a way that felt almost rare these days. "That must have hurt more than the actual ending," she said after a moment. I looked up at her. "Yeah," I said, "it did. There's a specific kind of pain that comes not from being rejected loudly, but from being let go of quietly. Like you weren't worth the argument. Like the other person had already made their peace before you even knew the conversation was happening." I had carried that particular hurt for weeks, turning it over in my chest like a stone I couldn't put down. I hadn't told anyone that. Not my friends, who were eager to move me into the "you're better off" narrative. Not my brother, who responded to emotional vulnerability with sports metaphors. Not anyone. But I told Maya. In a kitchen I had no real reason to be in, over coffee I hadn't asked for. "Can I ask you something honest?" she said. "You're going to anyway," I replied. She smiled briefly. "Do you actually miss her? Or do you miss feeling like someone chose you?" The question landed quietly, but it landed hard. I set my mug down, looked at the table, thought about it seriously because she had asked it seriously, and she deserved that. "I don't know," I admitted. I exhaled. I think I spent most of that relationship trying to earn something that should have just been given. And when it ended, the thing I kept coming back to wasn't her laugh or her voice or the way she made Sunday mornings feel. It was just this question. I pressed my lips together. Was I not enough? Did I just not qualify? Maya didn't say, "Of course you were enough." She didn't say she didn't deserve you, or any of the things people say when they want you to feel better without actually touching the wound. Instead, she said, very quietly, "That's a terrible question to be left alone with." And something in my chest cracked open just slightly. Not dramatically. Not with tears. Just a small, internal fracture. The kind that happens when someone sees the exact shape of your pain without you having to draw them a map. I looked at her then, really looked. At the way she held her mug. At the small crease between her brows that meant she was thinking carefully. At the fact that she hadn't checked her phone once since I sat down. "You're easier to talk to than you should be," I said. "Is that a complaint?" "No," I said. "It's just unexpected." She tilted her head slightly, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. "People usually are," she said, "when you actually stop and look at them." That sat between us for a moment, warm and a little weightless. Outside, the city moved at its usual indifferent pace. In here, time felt slower, thicker, like it had decided to linger. I reached for my coffee again. My fingers almost brushed hers on the table. Almost. I pulled back. So did she, but neither of us pretended it hadn't happened. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel like I was performing okayness for an audience. I just felt present, unexpectedly, quietly present. 5 minutes had become 40, and I hadn't noticed until just now. The light in the kitchen had shifted. That soft, golden afternoon kind that sneaks in through curtain gaps and settles on everything like it, belongs there. It had moved from the counter to the table, and somewhere in that slow migration, the conversation had changed too. Less careful, less rehearsed, like we had both quietly agreed to stop performing and just be. "Okay, serious question," Maya said, pulling her knee up to her chest on the chair, a habit that made her look younger, less guarded. "What was actually in the box?" I blinked. "What? The box? The one you carried in here like it contained evidence of a crime?" She nodded toward where I'd left it by the door. "What's in it?" "Her things," I said. "Obviously. But what things?" I thought about it. A green sweater, some books. A candle she never actually burned. A mug. I paused. "A photo of the two of you?" She was quiet for a second. Then, softly, "Did you look at it before you packed it?" I didn't answer immediately. You did, she said, not accusatory. Just reading me the way she'd been doing all afternoon, with an ease that should have felt intrusive but somehow didn't. For about 30 seconds, I admitted. Then I put it face down and closed the box. Maya nodded slowly, like that told her something important about me. Something she was carefully filing away. You're not as closed off as you think you are, she said. I never said I was closed off. You carried a photograph face down, she replied simply. I laughed, a real one, short and involuntary and slightly helpless. The kind that surprises you when it comes out, because you weren't aware anything was funny until it already was. Maya smiled at the sound of it, a different smile than the ones before, less teasing. More. Open. There it is, she said quietly. There what is, you the actual version. She tilted her head. You've been so careful this whole time, measuring every word, making sure nothing spills over. And then you laughed and… She gestured vaguely in my direction. There you are, I looked at her. The late light caught the edge of her face, and something tightened in my chest in a way I didn't entirely have language for yet. You're dangerous, I said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. Because I notice things? Because you make it feel safe to be noticed. The teasing softened. Her expression shifted. Something genuine, replacing the playfulness, like a current running beneath still water, finally rising to the surface. She held my gaze for a beat longer than comfortable. Then 2 beats. Then it stopped being uncomfortable entirely and became something else. Our knees were close. I wasn't sure when that had happened. I started. Probably, she agreed, but neither of us moved. The city outside continued its indifferent hum. A car passed. A door somewhere down the hall clicked shut. Normal sounds from a world that had no idea what was happening in this kitchen. She reached across the table, not to take my hand, just to straighten the handle of my mug, a small, unnecessary adjustment. But her fingers grazed mine in the process, and we both went still. She looked up. I looked down at her hand, then back at her face, and the distance between us, which had been shrinking all afternoon in ways I'd been pretending not to notice, felt suddenly like something I could cross in a single breath. I leaned forward slightly. She didn't lean back, and then, footsteps. Distinct and purposeful, in the hallway just outside the apartment door. We both heard it at the same moment. The handle moved if you felt that shift too. You already know this story is far from over. Stay with me, the door opened before either of us could move. My ex, Claire, stepped inside. Rain damp and distracted, keys still in her hand. She was looking down at her phone when she crossed the threshold. She almost made it 3 full steps before she looked up. She saw the box first, then me. The phone dropped to her side. Her expression moved through several things in quick succession: surprise, confusion, and then something harder and more complicated that I recognized immediately because I had seen it before. Not anger exactly, more like the look of someone who has walked into a room and found the furniture rearranged. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was even, controlled. "I came to return your things," I said, standing from the bar stool. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You weren't home, Maya." "I invited him in," Maya said from beside me. Her tone was light, but her posture had straightened. It was raining, and he'd been standing at the door. It hadn't been raining. We both knew that. Claire's eyes moved between us slowly, reading the room the way people do when they sense something they can't quite name. "You've been here a while," Claire said. It wasn't a question. "We were just talking," I said. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Claire set her keys on the hook by the door, a deliberate, careful movement, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her in the entire time we were together: possessiveness. Arriving exactly too late. "Talking," she repeated. "Yes," Maya said quietly. Claire looked at her then, and something unspoken moved between the two of them. The language of people who share walls and mornings, and the particular intimacy of domestic life. I watched it happen and felt suddenly like an outsider in a conversation I had accidentally started. "I should go," I said, reaching for my jacket. "You should have gone an hour ago," Claire said, not cruelly, just honestly, which somehow made it worse. I picked up my jacket. I didn't pick up the box. I moved toward the door and was almost through it when Claire said my name, just once. Quietly, I turned. "Did you actually come to return my things?" she asked, "or were you hoping I'd ask you to stay?" The question found every soft place in me and pressed, because here was the truth I hadn't admitted to anyone, barely even to myself. I didn't know. I had told myself this visit was about closure, about being adult and clean and resolved. But standing in that doorway with the evening air at my back and a box of memories at my feet, I couldn't say with certainty that some small, unexamined part of me hadn't been hoping she'd open the door, look at me differently, and rewrite the ending. I had spent months in that relationship feeling like a question she hadn't decided whether to answer yet. And even now, even after everything, I was still waiting for her verdict. "I came to return your things," I said finally. Claire held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, the same nod she had given when we ended things. Quiet, resolved. "Okay, that makes sense." I walked out. The door closed behind me. I stood in the hallway, jacket half on, the fluorescent light above me buzzing its dull, indifferent hum. My chest felt hollowed out in a way that had nothing to do with Claire, and everything to do with the answer I had just given. And the one I hadn't. I pressed my back against the wall. I closed my eyes. And I thought about a kitchen. About late afternoon light. About a woman who had looked at me like I was worth looking at. Who had listened without fixing. Who had made me laugh without trying. About fingers grazing mine over a coffee mug. About a moment that almost happened. Was I not enough? The old question rose again, familiar and uninvited. But this time, beneath it, something quieter. Something new. If this story is hitting close to home, drop a comment below. You are not alone in this feeling. And please, don't go anywhere, because what happens next changes everything. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard the door open again. Not Claire's careful, deliberate click. This was faster. Impulsive. "Hey," Maya's voice. Just that one word. But it stopped me the way a hand on the shoulder stops you. Completely. Immediately. I turned around. She was standing in the doorway in her socks, the hallway light catching her face. And she looked different out here than she had in the kitchen, less composed. Like she had made a decision quickly and hadn't given herself time to reconsider it. "You forgot something," she said. I looked down at my hands. I hadn't forgotten anything. I wasn't carrying anything. "I don't think I did," I said. "You forgot to finish the conversation," she said. I exhaled slowly. "Maya, don't." Her voice was quiet but certain. "Don't do the thing where you make yourself small to make everyone else comfortable. I've watched you do it for the last hour. I watched you do it just now with Claire. You gave her the answer she needed and walked out without once asking yourself what you needed." The hallway was narrow and poorly lit and an entirely unremarkable place for something important to happen. But that's the thing about important moments. They don't wait for the right setting. I leaned against the opposite wall, looking at her. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything," she said. "I want you to stop deciding you're not worth staying for." Something in my throat tightened. "You don't know me," I said. Not defensively, just honestly. "I know you carried a photograph face down," she said. "I know you've been so careful about every word all afternoon, because you're afraid that if you take up too much space, people will decide you're too much. I know you almost let yourself have something good an hour ago, and then pulled back the second you heard a sound in the hallway." She paused. "I know enough." I looked at her for a long moment. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere below us, a neighbor's television murmured through the ceiling. "She was your roommate," I said finally. "She is your roommate. That's—" "I know what it is," Maya said. "And I know what tonight was. And those two things can both be true and still point in the same direction. Which direction is that? She held my gaze steadily, toward something honest. I pushed off the wall, took one step toward her, then stopped. I'm not in a good place, I said. I'm standing in a hallway holding nothing, having just returned a box of someone else's memories. And I genuinely don't know if I'm capable of. I'm not asking you to be capable of anything, she interrupted gently. I'm asking you to not walk away from the first real conversation you've had in months because you're scared it means something. The words hit me somewhere deep and unguarded, because that was it exactly. That was the fear underneath the fear. Not that I was unlovable, but that I might be lovable, and still manage to ruin it. That someone might actually choose me, and I would find a way to prove them wrong. I looked at her standing there in her socks in a hallway, having chased me out of an apartment after a difficult moment, with no script and no guarantee, just honesty. Simple, uncalculated honesty. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. Neither do I, she said, but I'd rather figure it out than pretend this afternoon didn't happen. A long silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable. The kind that holds a question and waits patiently for the answer. I took the remaining steps toward her slowly. She didn't move back. And standing there, close enough that I could see the small, nervous exhale she was trying to hide, I finally understood that staying wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing I'd done in years. If someone has ever made you feel worth staying for, you know exactly what this moment feels like. Share this with them, and stay with me for the ending. Because this is where it gets beautiful. I didn't go back inside that night. We stood in the hallway for another 20 minutes, talking in low voices about nothing important and everything that was. The way conversations go, when two people are really just finding excuses to stay near each other a little longer. Eventually, Maya's neighbor opened their door, looked at us, looked away, and closed it again without a word. We both laughed at the same moment, and the laughter dissolved the last of the evening's tension like warm water over something that had been held too tight. Go home, she said finally, softly. Get some sleep? That's it? I said. She smiled. Not the slow, deliberate one from earlier, something smaller, more real. Give me your phone. I handed it over. She typed for a moment and handed it back. Her name, her number. A single message already sent to herself from my phone that just said, the actual version. I looked up at her. So I remember which one showed up tonight, she said simply. I walked to my car with something I hadn't felt in months sitting quietly in my chest. Not euphoria, not the dizzy, unsustainable rush of new infatuation. Just warmth. The particular warmth of being genuinely seen by another person and not flinching away from it. The weeks that followed were slow and deliberate, the way good things tend to be when both people have been careless before and decided not to be again. We met for coffee first. A different cafe, neutral ground, no boxes of memories between us. She was funny in ways I hadn't anticipated, quick and dry and occasionally absurd. She ordered the most complicated drink on the menu and then admitted she didn't actually like coffee that much. I stared at her. She shrugged. I just liked the idea of it, she said. I laughed for a long time at that. There were slow walks and long phone calls that ran past midnight without either of us noticing. There were honest conversations about the things that had broken us before, her own quiet history, of choosing people who needed saving over people who wanted to stay. My long habit of shrinking myself into whatever shape I thought someone needed, then wondering why I felt invisible. We were careful with each other. Not distant, careful. The way you handle something you recognize as fragile, not because it's weak, but because it matters. And somewhere in the middle of all that slowness, something extraordinary happened. I stopped asking the question. Not because someone forced me to, not because I had been reassured enough times that it finally stuck, but because I had spent enough mornings with Maya to understand that love, real love, Doesn't ask you to earn it. It just shows up. In someone who listens without fixing. In someone who chases you into a hallway in her socks because she'd rather have an honest conversation than a comfortable silence. In someone who saves your number under the actual version and means it. The box, as it turned out, Claire collected herself. I heard through a mutual friend that she had a new apartment now. A new chapter. I wished her well and meant it. Not with the complicated, loaded tenderness of someone still holding on, but with the clean simplicity of someone who had finally set something down. I drove past that apartment building once. A few months later, Maya was in the passenger seat, window down, her hand trailing in the evening air. She didn't know what building it was. I didn't point it out. I just kept driving. Towards something I had almost talked myself out of. Towards someone who had seen the most uncertain version of me and said, "I'd rather figure it out than pretend this afternoon didn't happen." I used to fear I was unlovable. Now I understand that I was simply waiting to be seen by the right person. And she answered the door. If this story moved you, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more. You deserve to be seen too, and you are worth staying for.